and salutations, my dearest friends. My name is Samantha, and today I'm going to be doing romance recommendations for books that have Omegaverse. Hello, how are you? Welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to Trope Week. If you guys didn't know, I am filming a video every single day where I give specific book recommendations based on a specific romance trope. Now, I've done 2 of these already. It's basically a week-long series where I give a bunch of book recommendations. I have a whole playlist because this is the 3rd round of it, so I will leave the link down below. There are so many romance tropes that I just keep doing these videos because there's so much to film. This is also kind of inside of Vlogmas as well. Hopefully, if I pre-film enough, I will have a video every day of December. Okay, those are my little announcements. Let's move on to the video. Omegaverse is what we are focusing on. It is the star of the show. Now, if you don't know what Omegaverse is, you're probably like, Samantha, what is that? What is it you speak of? Oh my gosh, you are in for a treat. Omegaverse is unlike anything I've ever experienced, and it's definitely a new trope to me. I really want to do a specific video where I kind of dive deep into the trope and do kind of like a guide to it and explain all of it. But I'm going to save that for when I have read a little bit more, and right now I'm just going to be talking about some Omegaverse books that I have really been loving on. Omegaverse really does center in romance. You'll see it in a lot of manga, but you can also see it in a lot of contemporary books, like the ones I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The best way I can describe Omegaverse is it is very similar to like shifter werewolf romances, okay? It is very in that realm. It's a lot of fated mates, a lot of possessive alpha heroes. You know, if you're familiar with those types of romances, you might really like Omegaverse. In an Omegaverse, there's 3 types of characters. You have an alpha, who is the big dog, the big daddy, very possessive, is more of the protector, and is looking for their mate to like bite and claim and create their pack. Then you have a beta, who is, you know, like a regular person. They don't have too many animalistic instincts, and like I said, they're a regular person, but they can also be fated mates and be involved in a pack, just depending on what kind of Omegaverse you read. And then you have the Omegas, who are like the creme de la creme to alphas. They're catnip to alphas. They are just utterly irresistible in all Omegaverse books, but the Omegas tend to be a little bit more submissive. Some Omegaverse, they can shift into werewolves, but a lot of them don't. They're kind of like amped up humans with animalistic instincts, and they desire to mate and have a pack. Another thing that is like really specific with Omegaverses, and this is like, you know, a little steamy if you're into like some more steamy books, alphas, they have fancy genitals, if you will, that have like a knot that can knot their omegas, and it's like really for the purpose of like breeding and procreating. It's a wild time, but it's so much fun, let me tell you. Like I said, I've never read anything like this before. Another thing that's very specific with Omegaverse is that there is something called mpreg, which means males can get pregnant and they can have children and procreate with other males, and it is just, like I said, a fun, wild time. There's really no rules to Omegaverse other than there's usually an alpha, there's usually an omega, and they mate. They mate. Like I said, I'm gonna do a whole video explaining it, and I'm sorry that this intro was so long, but I feel like I just need to introduce you to the world before I talk about the books. Some little other things that you might find in Omegaverse is something called nesting, which is like one of my favorite part of the trope. Basically, our Omegas kind of like to be spoiled, and they create these nesting places for their heat, and a heat is kind of like a week-long session of them just wanting intimacy and sexual desire with their alpha and with their pack, and it's just really fun. I can't say that enough. I'm just gonna hop into the recommendations, and we'll talk more about Omegaverse in future videos because I am obsessed with it at this point. First recommendation that I want to talk about is Fist Fang's Rival Omega by Ash Moon. This is a male-male Omegaverse, and it does have Mpreg. This is the first in the Moonstar dating agency. The rest of the series follows side characters, and I will say that this book has a happily ever after and a completed ending, so you can read the series out of order. First book is the one that I'm talking about, and it features Desmond and Chasen, who are basically professional fighters. Desmond is a professional fighter, but what makes him really unique is that he is an Omega in a world of alphas. Most of the professional fighters are all alphas, so he's definitely kind of the underdog. He's come from a pretty rough background and he feels like he needs to prove himself. He ends up meeting Chasen because they're really rivals. This is in Enemies to Lovers romance. Chasen is one of the champions of this fighting ring that they're in, and they're constantly talking trash and butting heads. I don't really follow fighting in like normal life, but if you guys watch, professional fighting, trash talking is like a huge part of the whole experience. So that's kind of how this book starts. They're trash talking each other, they become rivals, they're competing against each other. A huge part of this book is fated mates. So Desmond, obviously he wants to be a champion of like this fighting ring, but really he wants nothing more than to find his mate and make his family. He's had a really hard time because he's an Omega who's a fighter, and a lot of people are intimidated by him. He ends up going to this dating agency that his sister set him up with, and at first he thinks it's like totally bogus. It's like a lot of like spiritual elements that's going on. They're claiming that they can like read the stars and find your fated mate, and he thinks that it's completely bogus, but it's not. I love a fated mates trope, honestly. Like, it is one of my favorite tropes. It just like, it does something to me. So Chasen and Desmond are interwoven in so many different ways because of this dating agency, and also because of the fact that they're both fighters, and this was just so much fun. They had so much banter with one another and I really loved it. Some Omegaverses can get a little dark, but this one honestly was pretty slow burn and very sweet. I absolutely adored it. The next book I want to talk about is Alpha's Sacrifice, and this is a part of a series called the Irresistible Omega series. I would recommend the first and second book. The first book is called Alpha's Sacrifice, and the second book is called Alpha's Submission, and they both follow our four characters that I'm about to talk about. It is a series that does feature Mpreg, and the first two books feature a polyamorous romance. So we have two alphas, one beta, and one omega that kind of make up the pack, and I love this series so stinking much. I highly recommend reading the first and second book because these characters are amazing. The book starts off by following our Omega. He is in a relationship with a beta, but he is getting really sick because he needs an alpha's claim to survive through his heat. In this book, there is kind of this genetic mutation that's going on to Omegas, that their heats are much more intense and they're like absolutely irresistible to alphas. I will say that this book does have a few trigger warnings for sexual assault, just so you know, going up front. But our Omega and our Beta are in love with each other, but they are not able to give each other what they need, so they're searching for an alpha who can kind of complete their pack. I feel like I'm not explaining this book very well because there's so many characters and there's so much going on with this book, but basically our Beta, his name is Pelini, he is searching for an alpha to help the love of his life. He doesn't think that he can be with this Omega because he's not an alpha, so he ends up searching for an alpha, and like I said, he ends up meeting an alpha who is a doctor and an alpha who is a cop. The original agreement is that Lyndon is going to take care of this Omega and be his alpha, but they soon realize that they're all kind of connected with one of each other, and they end up forming this polyamorous relationship that is so beautiful. Also, a lot of side plot going on. So in this world, Omegas are really treated like they're a lower class. They don't have a choice on who they marry. Alphas get to do whatever they want. So this foursome is kind of trying to fight against that injustice, and they're also trying to discover this new mutation that is making Omegas go into an intense heat, and why they're so irresistible to all of these alphas, to the point that the alphas are sexually assaulting a lot of these Omegas. So there's a deep mystery in this book. and a bit of a prophecy, fated mates, all of the stuff that I kind of mentioned before. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is Manics by Grace McGinty. This is the first book in the Shadowbred series. It is a little bit different from the ones I talked about before. I feel like this one leans a little bit more into like a paranormal romance because the Manics is a supernatural breed in itself. It does have mpreg in it, but in order for a male Omega to become pregnant, they need a female Omega to be in their pack. The pack needs 2 Omegas, but they've been lacking a female Omega for generations, and the Manics breed is slowly dying out. That is where our heroine comes in. She is running from her past. She has a very dangerous man that is coming after her and her sister, and she needs to protect them, and she ends up bumping into the Manics because they are incredibly drawn into her smell because bum bum bum, she is a female Omega, which they haven't seen for decades, and they want to protect her, but they also obviously want her to be a part of their pack. So this is a polyamorous relationship. It has 5 men, 2 betas, 2 alphas, an Omega, and then our female Omega. So 6 people are in this relationship. It's a wild time, and it is a lot of fun. So they want to protect her from what she's running from, but they also really want her to become a part of her pack because she is the key to their breed's survival. Without her, their entire race will basically die out and become extinct. This is probably like the weirdest but the best book I've ever read because like I've read a bunch of mpreg books before, but this one was like so specific. So basically, female Omegas can become pregnant, but they can only become pregnant once within like a 9 months, like a normal human pregnancy. But if a female Omega mates with a male Omega, the male can like super suck her eggs out of her. I don't know how to explain it. He can basically like transport the eggs into himself, and he can carry like 5, 6 Manics breeds at a time. That is definitely what they want from her. They want her to be kind of like their surrogate, but eventually obviously they fall in love. And again, this has a little bit of a mystery element to it because she is running from her past and trying to protect her sister. I love this book. I love this series. It's a really good Omegaverse. A really good one. I talk about Catherine Moon. You guys know I'm like the biggest fan of Catherine Moon. Her books are like my absolute favorite. She writes a lot of reverse harem books, but she has an Omegaverse series. It is called the Sweetverse. She has said that this series is going to keep going, and she has some other books lined up, so I'm just going to talk about the ones that I've read. So the first one is Baby and the Late Night Howlers. The book follows our heroine Baby, and yes, that is her actual name, Baby. Such a weird name, but whatever, we're moving on. She thinks that she's a beta. In her life, she has been a beta wolf, and most people know if they're Omegas pretty early on, but she turns out to be a little bit of a late bloomer and ends up finding out that she is an Omega in the middle of a crowded bar with a bunch of alphas, which can be incredibly dangerous. She ends up meeting another beta who kind of saves her and takes her to safety, and she's taken to this compound where she is able to pick which pack she wants to be with that can help her get her through her first heat. Ends up being immediately attracted to this ragtag group of alphas that are a motorcycle gang. There are 12 alphas in this book. 12. Just immediately drawn to like these big burly alphas who are in this motorcycle gang, so she ends up kind of going and exploring that, and 6 of them she's romantically involved with, and then the other 6 are kind of just like more a part of her family. And again, this is a polyamorous romance. I like to call it polyamorous and not necessarily reverse harem, just because there's a lot of sword crossing, which if you don't know what that means, it basically means that the men also have relationships with each other. The men already have established romantic relations with each other, and then Baby kind of comes in and completes their pack. In this book, there is another motorcycle group that are their rivals, and their intentions are pretty much evil. They want to like steal Omegas and sell them to the black market. So Baby's in danger, and the motorcycle club needs to protect her as she's also going through heat and trying to mate with all of them. I love Catherine Moon's writing so freaking much. Her reverse harem books are amazing because yes, there are like 7 characters characters in this relationship, but each character has its own voice, its own point of view. Like, you get to see all of the guys' point of views, and it's so lovely and so well written. The next two in the series feature Baby's best friend Lola. So we have Lola and the Millionaires, part 1 and part 2. This one also has a little bit of trigger warnings for sexual assault, just so you know that going in. So Lola is a beta, and in the first book she's very jealous of her best friend Baby because she wants nothing more than to be an Omega and be spoiled by a bunch of alphas, and she's really just had a rough time. She's getting involved with a bad motorcycle game that wanted to like steal Omegas and sell them to the black market, and she was treated very poorly. I would definitely read the trigger warnings before going into this book because Lola has a lot of emotional hurt to the point that she's terrified of all men and all alphas. So she ends up getting this job at a fashion industry. She's surrounded by a bunch of alphas. She ends up meeting this pack that is already established. It's 4 alphas, 1 beta, and 1 omega, and they already have their omega. They're already established, but for whatever reason this pack is just like immediately drawn to Lola and want to take care of her and want to help her through everything that she's been through. Because she is still running from the motorcycle pack from like the very first book, she is in danger and she does need protection, and that is kind of how the book picks off. About this book was Lola and just seeing her gain her confidence back. She literally went through so freaking much that like in the beginning of the book it was heartbreaking to read about, but then you see her like get her strength and realize like what she deserves and realize that she's worthy of love, and it's just so beautifully written, and it's also incredibly steamy and wonderful, and Catherine Moon never freaking misses. She never misses. Next one that I want to talk about is called Bad Alpha, and it's still in the same Sweetverse series. This one follows Eve, who is a female alpha. What? She is so badass. I literally love her. If I had to pick a favorite book in the series, this might be it. This might be it. So Eve is a female alpha, and not only is she an alpha, but she's a freaking hitman or hit woman. She's an assassin. She gets hired to like kill bad guys, and she's literally so badass. She ends up getting hired to do a job to kill this person named Adam, and she thinks that he's like this regular beta, and he turns out to be an omega. So once she realizes that she's been lied to, she's trying to figure out like who put the hit on him, what's going on. Adam has been running for a really long time, and he needs an alpha to kind of bond with him for protection. So he kind of like lures Eve in, and it's definitely an enemies to lovers, opposites attract kind of romance. They end up forming a bond. Eve really doesn't think that she can be the alpha that Adam needs her to be, so she tries to like pawn him off to another alpha group. It is a polyamorous romance though, so Adam and Eve, I didn't even realize that, and they have their own bond, but they end up meeting another pack of alphas, 3 alphas in total, who kind of help protect them as well, and they all form a pack. This picks up from the first and second book, where they're trying to hunt down that motorcycle gang that is trying to sell Omegas to the black market. They realize that it's much bigger than any of them ever expected. Adam's sister had even been kidnapped because she's an Omega, and he's trying to save her, and there's this whole mystery underground element to it, which I absolutely loved. The plot of this book, it was so interesting. The most was there were multiple alphas in the relationship, but throughout the entire book Eve was still like the dominant one, and a lot of times you don't really see dominant women in books, but this one was so well written, and I adored it. I really truly did. So if you are new to Omegaverse, or even if you think like I don't know, this whole shindig sounds a little weird, I would definitely say that the Sweetverse series by Catherine Moon is like the way to go, because it's such a great introduction into the world and describes the whole hierarchy of alphas, omegas, and betas so freaking well. Another author that contributes to this series, I believe her name is Lana Cole. I'm going to put her book right here. Her and Catherine Moon like interchangeably write books in this series. Wrote one that I'm going to put right here that is kind of like a rock star Omegaverse book, and yeah, so I haven't read any of her books, but they are part of the series and a lot of people love them, so if you kind of want more books to read, There you go. This one is the one that I'm currently reading right now, and that is Slow Heat by Leda Blake. This is a male-male romance that features MPreg, and it also has a pretty huge age gap. So in this world, alphas and omegas are basically sent to like universities. So alphas are all sent to an alpha university, and omegas are all sent to omega university, learn how to fulfill their roles that is required of them because of their biology and of their nature. Jackson is a young alpha. He has not been privileged enough to be introduced to omegas to pick his mate yet. He's still learning how to be an alpha, but one day he's on campus and he finds his fated mate. It turns out that his fated mate is actually a professor on the campus who is like 10, 12 years older than him. So this omega was pretty convinced that he was never going to find his alpha, that his fated mate wasn't out there or maybe passed away because he had gone through so many heat cycles without finding his alpha. So he thought like he was free and in the clear, and then in comes this hotshot young alpha that is just wanting to claim him. It has an age gap to it. Also has a little bit of a power balance because alphas inherently are much more dominant than omegas are, but they kind of have to figure out how they're going to interact with each other because there's such an age gap. He's a professor, and this one is very, very steamy. Literally like the first page just like opens up in the steam. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm liking it a ton. Greetings and salutations, editing Sam here. Sorry, my hair is wet. I just got out the shower. I just want to quickly pop on here because I don't think that I did an adequate job really describing the trigger warnings, and I know trigger warnings are so important, and I want you guys to all take care and be safe with the books that you're reading. So something to keep in mind with Omegaverse, you can have a very sweet Omegaverse setting, but there also are some darker Omegaverse because inherently the world is surrounded by hierarchy. There are a lot of times where omegas don't really have a ton of rights. You do get a lot of possessive alphas, so you kind of have to wade through the genre that I have read have all been really well written, and there are some Omegaverses that are very sweet and don't have darker topics, so you can definitely find some of those, and I do mention some of those in this video. Another thing to mention with MPreg, a lot of times in Omegaverse, a male pregnancy is pretty high risk, so there are quite a few trigger warnings for things like miscarriage, infertility, and sexual assault. So just, like I said, keep in mind, and I want to be as open as possible so you guys know what you're getting into when I'm recommending books. No, by no means do I want to scare you off from these books because obviously I love them, I'm recommending them to you, but I also know people have different trigger warnings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a complete separate video on the Omegaverse world because it is so vast and I barely even scratched the surface with this video. So there will be more videos explaining the universe. And then secondly, I'm going to list all of the books that I mentioned down below, and I will have asterisks for one that contain darker themes and potential trigger warnings. So if I didn't go into enough depth in this video, then you can refer to that description box and Goodreads reviews as well. So hopefully that's helpful. Let me know if there's anything I can do to improve the way that I talk about trigger warnings when I do my recommendation videos. I'm always looking to improve my videos. Sorry that this intro was a little chatty. I just felt like I had a lot to introduce with this genre because it is so huge and intricate. Also, not all Omegaverse is werewolf shifters, but the majority of the ones that I'm talking about in the video are werewolf shifters. Again, I will have a part 2 for the more extended universe. All right, we're gonna get back to the video. We're gonna get back to the video right now. Oh my goodness gracious, I feel like I've been talking so long and I still have like 5 more books I want to talk about. So we're gonna have to do a part 2 to this video. If there are some books that I didn't mention, it's because we're gonna have to cut this video short. I'm talking way too long. I'm gonna do a part 2 to this video. If you guys have any recommendations for Omegaverse, please let me know. Leave a comment down below. I'm still fairly new to this trope, so I'm sure there are a ton that are just like out there waiting for me to read. Okay, I know this trope is like very specific and different from like what I normally read, but I love it and it's a lot of fun and I hope you guys give it a chance. I promise you will have fun. Unless you don't like steamy books, then this one video was really not it for you and I apologize for that. We'll have more tropes to talk about, okay? Rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Remember, there will be a video for the rest of the week on more tropes, so I will see you soon. As always, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend time with me. It means the world to me. I hope you guys are all staying happy and healthy, and I'll see you next time. Bye!